At Christmas dinner, my daughter handed her stepmother a $15,000 designer handbag and announced, "This is for my biggest inspiration as a woman." Then she slid a wrapped package across the table to me, dish towels with a note reading, "For all your cleaning." I smiled, said thank you, and walked straight out that door. What I did next made that leech learn who really mattered. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you amazing people out there. But to understand how we got to that Christmas disaster, you need to hear the whole story. Because what happened that night wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment I finally decided enough was enough. 3 years ago, in January 2022, I was Martha Stevens, 42 years old, married to Richard for 19 years, living in our suburban Denver home with our 20-year-old daughter Vanessa. She was finishing her junior year at Colorado State, and I thought I had it all figured out. Richard worked in real estate. I managed our household and helped with his business paperwork, and our family seemed solid. I should have seen the signs earlier. Richard started working late more often, buying new clothes, suddenly caring about his appearance in ways he hadn't since we were dating. But I trusted him. After 19 years, why wouldn't I? The day I found out, I was doing laundry. Ironic, considering that Christmas gift 3 years later. Richard's phone buzzed with a text while he was in the shower. The name H popped up with a heart emoji and a message that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait for tonight, baby. Your wife will never know." I sat on our bed, holding that phone, feeling 19 years of marriage crumble in my hands. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it, but I've never been the type to live in denial. I confronted him that evening. "Who is H, Richard?" He went pale, stammered some excuse about a client, but I wasn't buying it. After an hour of lies, the truth came out. Heather Davidson, 28 years old, wealthy, successful, everything I apparently wasn't anymore at 42. She understands my ambitions. "Martha," he said, as if that justified destroying our family. "She makes me feel alive again." I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him hurt the way I was hurting. Instead, I asked, "How long?" 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of him coming home to me after being with her. The betrayal cut deeper than I knew was possible. We tried counseling for Vanessa's sake, but Richard's heart was already gone. He'd light up when his phone buzzed, thinking it was her. He'd zone out during our sessions, probably planning his next rendezvous. After 5 miserable months, in June 2022, I filed for divorce. That's when Heather entered our lives like a perfectly manicured hurricane. She was everything I wasn't. Young, glamorous, with a silver BMW and designer everything. She owned some kind of investment consulting business and always looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. When Richard brought her to Vanessa's college graduation that May, I watched my daughter's eyes widen with something that looked dangerously close to worship. "Mom, this is Heather," Vanessa said, her voice filled with an admiration I'd rarely heard. "She's incredible. She built her whole business from nothing." Heather smiled with perfect veneered teeth and extended a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you, Martha. Vanessa's told me what a dedicated homemaker you are." The pause before dedicated homemaker told me everything I needed to know about how my daughter had described me. But I was still unprepared for what came next. The changes started small. Within 2 months of the divorce being finalized in August 2022, Vanessa began peppering our conversations with casual references to what Heather says or how Heather does things. "Mom, you really should update your wardrobe," Vanessa mentioned during one of our coffee dates in September. "Heather says first impressions matter more than most people realize." "I'm not interviewing for jobs, honey. I'm just your mom." "That's kind of the problem," she replied, scrolling through her phone. "You don't really have goals anymore." Goals! I'd spent 19 years supporting her father's goals, raising her, managing our household. But apparently, none of that counted in Heather's world. October brought the first real sting. Vanessa posted an Instagram photo from some charity gala, her in a new dress I couldn't afford, standing next to Heather in front of a step-and-repeat banner. "Learning from the best. Inspiration. You're women in success," read the caption. When I liked the photo, Vanessa called me 20 minutes later. "Mom, Could you maybe not like my professional posts? It looks weird when my followers see my mom's name. I'm proud of you. Sweetheart, why wouldn't I like your photo? It's just, Heather's helping me build a brand, and family stuff kind of dilutes the message. Family stuff. I was family stuff now. November got worse. Thanksgiving dinner was split between two households for the first time. Vanessa spent the main meal with Richard and Heather, then stopped by my apartment for dessert, but only stayed 40 minutes before rushing off to some networking event Heather had organized. Can't you just be happy that I'm making connections? She asked when I mentioned feeling hurt. Heather's introducing me to people who could actually help my career. What about spending time with family? Mom, you act like family time is more important than my future. Her tone was getting sharper, more condescending. Heather says successful people prioritize differently. Christmas 2022 was my first holiday alone in 20 years. Vanessa spent Christmas Eve with Richard and Heather at some ski resort in Vail, posting Instagram stories of champagne toasts and designer winter gear. She showed up at my apartment Christmas morning for exactly 1 hour, bearing a gift bag from Target. I got you some nice hand cream and a candle, she said, not bothering to hide her phone while I opened them. Heather helped me pick them out. Heather helped her pick out drugstore hand cream for her mother while wearing what looked like $1,000 sweater in her Instagram stories. They're lovely, thank you, I said, watching her text someone while I carefully read the candle label. Oh, and I won't be here for New Year's either. Heather's taking me to this amazing party in Aspen, lots of potential business contacts. That night, I looked through Vanessa's Instagram posts from the past 6 months. Every photo with Heather was captioned with words like inspiration, mentor, and role model. The last photo she'd posted with me was from her graduation, 6 months ago. January 2023 brought a new level of casual cruelty. Vanessa announced she was changing her major from education to business. Teaching is so limited, she explained over lunch at a restaurant she complained about the entire time. Heather's showing me what real success looks like. You've wanted to be a teacher since you were 8 years old. That was before I understood how the world actually works. She finally looked up from her phone. Mom, you don't get it because you've never really worked, but I want more than just this. She gestured vaguely at our surroundings, a perfectly nice cafe where we used to enjoy spending time together. Valentine's Day was particularly brutal. Vanessa posted a long Instagram tribute to Heather about the woman who taught me to dream bigger. Meanwhile, she forgot to call me on my birthday 2 weeks later. When I gently mentioned it the next day, she sighed like I was being unreasonable. Mom, I'm really busy with midterms and the business stuff Heather's teaching me. Can't you just understand that not everything revolves around you? Not everything revolves around you. My own daughter was treating me like a needy acquaintance instead of the woman who'd raised her, but the worst was yet to come. Spring 2023 brought Vanessa's transformation into someone I barely recognized. She'd started dressing differently, expensive clothes that I knew she couldn't afford on her part-time job income. When I asked about it, she was evasive. Heather's teaching me about investing in my image, she said. You have to spend money to make money. Where are you getting money to spend? Dad's helping me out while I focus on my studies and learning the business. The business? That was new. What business? Heather's bringing me into her investment consulting firm as an intern. I'll learn everything from the ground up. This was the first I'd heard of Vanessa working with Heather professionally, and something about it made me uneasy. But every time I tried to ask questions, Vanessa shut me down. Mom, you don't understand business. Please just trust that I know what I'm doing. Easter 2023 was canceled entirely. Vanessa flew to Miami with Heather and Richard for what she called a business conference. It's a real estate investment seminar, she explained. Heather's one of the featured speakers. I spent Easter alone, eating takeout Chinese food and wondering when I'd become so irrelevant to my own daughter's life. Mother's Day was worse. Vanessa took me to a chain restaurant, the kind with sticky floors and laminated menus, while posting Instagram stories from the 5-star brunch she'd had with Heather the previous weekend. The salmon here isn't as fresh as the place Heather took me to, she said, poking at her food. They fly theirs in daily from Alaska. This is fine, Vanessa. I'm just happy to spend time with you. You're so easily satisfied, Mom. She finally looked at me directly. Heather says that's why some people never advance in life. They accept mediocrity instead of demanding excellence. I took a sip of my water, swallowing down the hurt along with it. And what do you think? I think she's right. I think you've been settling your whole life, and honestly, it's kind of embarrassing. Embarrassing. My own daughter found me embarrassing. Embarrassing how? Like when I tell people about my family, I talk about Dad's real estate business and Heather's investment firm. But what do I say about you? That you keep house? The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. I paid the check and drove her home in silence, my heart breaking a little more with each passing mile. That night, I called Richard. We barely spoke anymore except about logistics, but I needed to understand what was happening to our daughter. She's just growing up, Martha, he said dismissively, learning about the real world. The real world doesn't require her to treat her mother like garbage. Maybe if you'd shown more ambition during our marriage, she'd have a different role model to look up to. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering if everyone really saw me as the failure Vanessa seemed to think I was. But summer 2023 brought something that made me stop questioning myself and start questioning everything else. Vanessa announced she was dropping out of college for her senior year to work full-time with Heather's firm. It's an incredible opportunity, Mom. Heather's making me her junior partner. Honey, you're 1 year away from graduating. With a degree that'll get me a $40,000 a year job. Heather's offering me the chance to make 6 figures while I'm still in my 20s. What exactly would you be doing? Client relations? Mostly social media marketing, helping young professionals understand investment opportunities. The vague answers made me nervous, but Vanessa brushed off my concerns. You're thinking small again, Mom. This is exactly what Heather warned me about. People who don't understand success trying to hold you back with their fear-based thinking. Fear-based thinking. Another phrase that sounded like it came straight from Heather's mouth. By fall 2023, Vanessa was fully launched as Heather's protégé. She moved into a fancy apartment downtown that I knew she couldn't afford, drove a new car, and dressed like she was making the kind of money that takes years to build. Business is really good, she said vaguely when I asked how she could afford her new lifestyle. What kind of returns are Heather's clients seeing? Amazing ones, like 20% monthly sometimes. Heather has this system that's just incredible. 20% monthly? Even with my limited financial knowledge. That sounded impossible. But what did I know? I was just a homemaker who didn't understand business. The final straw came in November 2023, at Vanessa's birthday dinner. She'd chosen an expensive steakhouse and invited Richard and Heather. I felt like an afterthought at my own daughter's celebration. Mom, I have some exciting news, Vanessa announced over dessert. I'm investing my trust fund from Grandma Ruth in Heather's firm. The trust fund. $50,000 that my mother had left specifically for Vanessa's education or first home purchase. Sweetheart, maybe you should have that looked at by an independent financial advisor. There you go again, Vanessa interrupted. Always assuming the worst, always trying to limit me. Heather placed a perfectly manicured hand on Vanessa's arm. Your mother just wants to protect you, honey. Some people are naturally more risk-averse. The condescending smile that accompanied those words made my blood boil, but I kept quiet. What else could I do? 2 weeks later, Vanessa called to tell me she wouldn't be coming to Thanksgiving. Heather's taking me to this incredible business retreat in Napa Valley. All her top clients will be there. What about our family tradition? Mom, I'm building my future. Can't you just be supportive for once? That Thanksgiving, I sat alone in my apartment with a frozen turkey dinner, scrolling through Vanessa's Instagram stories from wine country. Photo after photo of her laughing with people I didn't know, in places I couldn't afford, living a life that apparently had no room for the woman who'd raised her. But I had no idea that my real troubles were just beginning. December 2024 arrived with an invitation that surprised me. Vanessa actually wanted me at Christmas dinner. After 2 years of being an afterthought, suddenly I was welcome at Richard's house for the holiday meal. It'll be nice to have the whole family together, she said over the phone, sounding more like her old self than she had in months. I should have known something was up. I spent the entire day of December 23rd trying to pick the right outfit. Something that wouldn't be too fancy or too casual, too expensive or too cheap. Everything felt wrong. Finally, I settled on a simple black dress and the pearl earrings my mother had given me. When I pulled into the driveway at 6 o'clock, I barely recognized the place. Heather had transformed our modest colonial into something out of Architectural Digest, professional landscaping, expensive outdoor lighting, a front door that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Richard answered wearing a sweater I'd never seen before, looking more relaxed and confident than he had in the last years of our marriage. "Martha, you look nice," he said, the pause before nice telling me exactly how I actually looked. The inside was worse. Gone were the family photos I'd carefully arranged, the furniture we'd saved up for together, the warm colors I'd loved. Everything was now stark white and glass and metal, beautiful in the way that museum exhibits are beautiful, cold. "Welcome to our home," Heather said, appearing in a red dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She air-kissed me like we were acquaintances at a charity function. "I love what you've done with your hair." I hadn't done anything with my hair. It was exactly the same as always. Vanessa bounded down the stairs wearing a new outfit that I immediately recognized as expensive, the kind of casual elegance that only comes with serious money. "Mom, you made it!" She hugged me quickly, then stepped back. "Don't you love what Heather's done with the place? It's like a complete transformation." "It's certainly different," I said, looking around the living room where Vanessa had taken her first steps. "Different good or different bad?" Heather asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just different." Dinner was an exercise in social torture. The dining room table, my old dining room table, was set with china I'd never seen, flowers I couldn't afford, and wine that Richard kept praising like he'd discovered it himself. "Heather has such an eye for presentation," he said, raising his glass. "She could have been an event planner." "I actually considered it," Heather replied, "but investment consulting is so much more lucrative." Throughout the meal, I listened to them discuss people I didn't know, places I'd never been, and experiences I couldn't afford. Vanessa hung on Heather's every word, laughing at observations that weren't particularly funny, and nodding along with comments that weren't especially insightful. "Vanessa's been such an asset to the business," Heather said as we moved on to dessert. "She has a natural instinct for reading people, knowing who's ready to take their finances seriously." "I learned from the best," Vanessa replied, beaming at her stepmother. "Actually," Richard said, "I think it's time for gifts." This was new. We'd never done Christmas gifts at dinner. That was always a morning tradition. But apparently, traditions were as disposable as ex-wives in this house. Heather handed Vanessa an elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a designer handbag, the kind I'd seen in magazines, but never in real life. "Oh my God, Heather!" Vanessa pulled out a black leather purse with gold hardware. "This is incredible." "It's from Hermes," Heather said casually. "I thought you should have something appropriate for client meetings." Then came the moment that changed everything. Vanessa presented her gift to Heather, another beautifully wrapped box that had clearly cost serious money. "This is for my biggest inspiration as a woman," she announced, and I felt my stomach drop. Heather opened it to reveal a gold bracelet that caught the light like it was made of actual stars. "Oh, honey, it's gorgeous. You have such wonderful taste." They hugged like mother and daughter, and I had to look away. "Mom, this is for you," Vanessa said, sliding a small, poorly wrapped package across the table. I opened it to find 3 dish towels, plain white ones with a note that read, "For all your cleaning. Love, V." The table went quiet. Even Richard looked uncomfortable. "Thank you, sweetie," I said, forcing a smile. "They're very practical." "I thought you'd appreciate something useful," Vanessa said, already turning back to admire Heather's bracelet. "Since you spend so much time in the kitchen anyway." I sat there for another minute, watching my daughter and my replacement bond over expensive gifts while I held dish towels in my lap. Then I stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said to Heather. "It was lovely." "You're leaving already?" Richard asked. "I think it's time." I kissed Vanessa on the forehead. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean into it either. Then I walked out of my old house carrying dish towels and what was left of my dignity. In my car, I sat in the driveway for a moment, looking at the warm light spilling from the windows of the life that used to be mine. Inside, they were probably already forgetting I'd been there. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the grateful ex-wife, the understanding mother, the woman who smiled while her own daughter handed her cleaning supplies for Christmas. It was time to stop accepting mediocrity, starting with how I let people treat me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of determined activity. I'd spent almost 3 years being the victim of my own story, and I was tired of it. If Vanessa thought I lacked ambition, she was about to see how wrong she was. I started small, getting my hair cut and colored by an actual stylist instead of trimming it myself. I bought clothes that fit properly and made me feel confident instead of invisible. I enrolled in online courses about digital investigation and social media analysis, not because I wanted to compete with Heather, but because I was tired of being the only person in every conversation who didn't understand technology. Most importantly, I started paying careful attention to Heather's investment firm. Something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole operation. 20% monthly returns? Guaranteed profits? In an economy where savings accounts earned less than 1% annually, Heather's promises seemed mathematically impossible. I started with basic research, looking up Heather's business registration, checking for any regulatory filings, searching for legitimate business addresses. What I found was troubling. Lots of social media presence, very little actual business documentation. Then I did something that would have horrified my old self. I created a fake Facebook profile. Margaret Stevens from Phoenix, Arizona. Divorced, looking to rebuild her financial future. Cautiously interested in investment opportunities. I joined the Facebook groups that Heather promoted to her clients, Financial Freedom Seekers and Women Building Wealth. The more I read, the more concerned I became. People were investing their life savings based on screenshots that could have been faked in minutes. Others were taking out loans to fund investments in a company that seemed to have no permanent address and no verifiable track record beyond Heather's Instagram posts. When I tried expressing gentle concerns in the groups, I was quickly shut down by true believers who accused me of being negative or jealous. Heather has completely changed my life, wrote Carol Peterson from Oklahoma, who'd apparently invested her late husband's life insurance settlement. Finally, someone who doesn't patronize women about money, posted Linda Martinez from Tampa. The red flags were everywhere, but people wanted to believe so badly that they ignored them, including my daughter. I tried calling Vanessa in early February to share my concerns, but she cut me off immediately. "Mom, I can't believe you're stalking Heather's business online. That's really inappropriate." "I'm not stalking anyone. I'm trying to understand. What you're trying to do is sabotage my success because you can't stand that I'm doing well without you." "Vanessa, that's not true." "It is true. You've been weird and bitter ever since Dad left, and now you're taking it out on me and Heather." The accusations stung because part of me wondered if it was true. Was I investigating Heather's business because I genuinely thought something was wrong or because I resented her success? But as February turned to March, I started noticing things that had nothing to do with my personal feelings. Complaints began appearing in the investor groups, quickly deleted, but not before I could screenshot them. People mentioned delayed payments, difficulty reaching Heather directly, and promises that weren't being kept. I also noticed that several of Heather's biggest success stories, the people whose testimonials she featured most prominently, had profiles that looked suspiciously fake. Brand new accounts with no friends, no posting history, and profile photos that reverse image searches revealed were stock photos. By April, I had dozens of screenshots and a growing network of concerned investors who were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. But I also had a daughter who was becoming increasingly hostile toward me. "You just can't stand that Heather believes in me when you never did," she said during one particularly painful phone call in late April. "I've always believed in you. No, you believed in me being safe, being small, being like you. Heather believes in me being successful, being like me." The phrase stuck like a knife between my ribs. "What's wrong with being like me, Vanessa?" "Mom, you've never taken a risk in your entire life. You married Dad straight out of college. Never had a real career, never traveled anywhere interesting, never did anything ambitious. You just existed. 23 years of raising her, supporting her father's dreams, building a home, managing our family's life. All of that was just existing. I took the risk of having you," I said quietly. "That's not a risk, Mom. That's just what people do." The line went dead, and I sat in my apartment wondering when my daughter had learned to be so cruel. But I was also starting to understand something important. My investigation into Heather's business wasn't about jealousy anymore. It was about protecting the people she was going to hurt. including my daughter. Because while everyone was dismissing me as just a bitter ex-wife, I was building a case that would expose the truth about the woman who thought she could steal my family and other people's money. By May 2025, my fake Facebook persona had gained the trust of dozens of Heather's investors. I'd carefully positioned Margaret Stevens as a concerned but loyal client who was simply asking reasonable questions about communication delays and administrative issues. The private messages started pouring in. Real people with real problems, sharing stories that made my blood run cold. Carol Peterson from Oklahoma had invested her late husband's life insurance money, $85,000 that was supposed to secure her retirement. Linda Martinez from Tampa had taken a second mortgage on her house. James Wallace from Seattle had liquidated most of his 401k. All of them were now dealing with delayed payments, unreturned phone calls, and excuses that changed weekly. "I've been trying to reach Heather for over a month," Carol wrote to me privately. "She was supposed to roll over my profits into a new investment tier, but now I can't even get her assistant to respond to emails." "Same here," replied Linda. "And when I asked questions in the main group, they deleted my posts and said I was spreading negativity. I started documenting everything, screenshots of conversations, copies of investment agreements, records of promised returns versus actual payments. What emerged was a textbook pattern of affinity fraud, using personal relationships and social proof to manipulate victims into increasingly larger investments. But I knew that any evidence coming from Martha Stevens would be dismissed as the vindictive actions of a jealous ex-wife. I needed someone with credibility to investigate. That's when I reached out to Jessica Martinez, a financial reporter from the Denver Business Journal who'd been covering questionable investment schemes in Colorado. I used my real name this time, laying out everything I'd discovered during our coffee meeting at a downtown cafe. "I know how this looks," I told her. "Ex-wife trying to sabotage her replacement. But these people are going to lose everything they have, and my daughter is going to be left holding the responsibility when Heather disappears." Jessica was appropriately skeptical at first, but the evidence was compelling. She started her own investigation, reaching out to investors and checking with financial regulators. 2 weeks later, she called with news that confirmed my worst fears. "Martha, your instincts were right. The Colorado Division of Securities has been watching Heather's operation for several months. They're building a case, but they need more evidence of actual financial harm to investors." What does that mean for Vanessa? If she's been actively recruiting investors and handling client money, she could face serious civil liability. Criminal charges are possible if prosecutors think she knew about the fraud. I spent the following week in agony, knowing what was coming, but unable to warn my daughter without revealing my role in the investigation. Every time my phone rang, I hoped it would be Vanessa calling to reconcile. Instead, it was usually Jessica with updates on her investigation. In mid-May, everything started unraveling at once. Heather announced on her social media that she was expanding internationally and would be traveling extensively to establish overseas partnerships. This was a classic red flag. Fraudsters often use international expansion as cover for disappearing with whatever money remains. Then the complaints started going public. A few brave investors began posting in the Facebook groups about payment delays and communication problems. Instead of addressing the concerns, the group moderators started banning people and deleting posts. On May 23rd, Jessica published her exposé in the Denver Business Journal. The headline read, "Local investment firm under investigation for possible Ponzi scheme." Local news stations picked up the story within hours. By evening, Vanessa's name and photo were circulating on social media as Heather's business partner and client recruiting specialist. The phone calls started immediately. Reporters, angry investors, former clients demanding explanations. Vanessa's social media accounts were flooded with accusations and threats, and within 48 hours, Heather had vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye message to clients, no explanation to the people who'd trusted her with their life savings. She simply disappeared, leaving Vanessa to face the consequences alone. Richard, predictably, claimed complete ignorance. He'd been deceived just like everyone else, he told reporters. The fact that he'd lost $50,000 of his own money somehow made him a victim rather than an enabler. My phone finally rang at 10:30 on the night of May 25th. Mom? Vanessa's voice was small and scared, nothing like the confident woman who'd been lecturing me about business success for the past 2 years. I'm here, honey. I think I'm in really big trouble. For the first time in months, my daughter needed me more than she needed Heather. And despite everything she'd put me through, all I wanted was to protect her. Tell me what happened, I said. And for the first time in over a year, she told me the truth. She's gone, Mom. Heather just disappeared. Vanessa was crying, really crying, not the composed tears she'd learned to use for sympathy. This was messy sobbing, the kind that comes from genuine terror. Where are you now? I asked, already grabbing my car keys. At Dad's house. But he's freaking out about reporters calling, and he keeps saying this wasn't his fault. Her voice broke. He's acting like he doesn't even know me. Of course he was. Richard had always been excellent at distancing himself when situations became uncomfortable. I drove to my old house and found 2 news vans parked across the street. Vanessa met me at the door, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. They're saying I might go to prison, Mom. I pulled her into my arms for the first time in months. She felt small and frightened, like the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. We're going to figure this out, I promised. But first, you need to tell me everything. Over the next hour, the whole story came pouring out. Heather had convinced Vanessa that they were building a revolutionary investment platform that would democratize wealth building for young professionals. Vanessa's job was to recruit clients through social media and networking events, people who trusted her because she was young, relatable, and genuinely believed in what she was selling. I brought in 42 people, Mom. 42 people who trusted me. She showed me a list on her phone with names and investment amounts. Some of them put in their entire savings. Sarah from college invested $15,000 for her wedding fund. Did you know it was a scam? No, I swear, I thought it was completely legitimate. Heather showed me client statements, testimonials, bank records. She even had me meet some of her successful investors. Vanessa wiped her nose with a tissue. But now I'm realizing those people were probably paid actors. Richard appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Martha, maybe I shouldn't what? Help my daughter? The lawyer says Vanessa shouldn't discuss the case with anyone until we understand the full scope of the investigation. I'm not anyone. I'm her mother. I turned back to Vanessa. Do you have copies of the documents Heather showed you? Some of them. Why? Because we're going to need every piece of evidence we can find to prove you were deceived, too. Richard scoffed. Martha, this isn't some detective show. The FBI handles these things. We just need to cooperate and hope for the best. But hoping for the best had never been enough for me. Over the next week, I helped Vanessa organize her defense while quietly planning something more proactive. The authorities were building their case methodically, but that could take months or even years. Meanwhile, Heather was free to disappear completely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: my growing network of defrauded investors. Through the Facebook groups, I'd connected with dozens of victims who were more motivated than any federal agent to see justice done. Carol Peterson had contacts in the hotel industry. Linda Martinez's cousin worked for a credit monitoring company. James Wallace knew people in tech who understood digital tracking. She can't just vanish, Carol said during one of our group video calls. Someone with her ego and lifestyle needs will surface somewhere. The question is where, added Linda. And how do we find her before she runs another scam? That's when I suggested something that surprised even myself. What if we didn't wait for her to surface? What if we forced her out of hiding? The plan was simple, but risky. We'd use social media to make Heather's face recognizable to hospitality workers at luxury resorts worldwide. Carol had connections with hotel managers across the Caribbean and Central America, places where Heather was likely to hide. Linda's cousin helped us run credit monitoring searches that showed recent transactions in Costa Rica under variations of Heather's name. James found archived social media posts that revealed her preferences for specific hotel chains and resort types. Within 2 weeks, we had a network of informal spotters at high-end properties from Cancun to Belize City. The first sighting came from a bartender in Costa Rica who recognized Heather from photos we'd circulated. She was staying at a luxury resort under the name Helena Davies. already starting to cultivate new investors among wealthy tourists. But when I told Richard I was flying to Costa Rica to confront her, he thought I'd lost my mind. "Martha, what exactly do you think you're going to accomplish? Even if you find her, you can't force her to come back." "Maybe not, but I can make sure she doesn't disappear again." The truth was, I didn't have a master plan. I just knew that sitting around waiting for justice wasn't working for the victims, and it wasn't working for my daughter, who was facing potential criminal charges while the real architect of the scheme lived in paradise. But I also knew something that Richard didn't. I was tired of being underestimated. And sometimes, being underestimated was the greatest advantage you could have. Costa Rica was both terrifying and liberating. I'd never traveled anywhere exotic during my marriage. Richard always said we couldn't afford it, then spent the money on golf equipment instead. Now, at 45, I was on my first international solo trip, funded by Carol Peterson's determination to see justice done. The resort where Heather was staying was exactly what I'd expected, remote enough to avoid casual recognition, luxurious enough to feed her ego. I checked in using a credit card Carol had provided, posing as a recently divorced woman treating herself to a healing vacation. Finding Heather wasn't difficult. She maintained the same predictable routines that had made her trackable online. Every morning at 9, she appeared at the infinity pool. Every evening at 6, she held court at the poolside bar, already working to charm wealthy tourists with her investment expertise. She looked different, hair darker, style more understated, but the arrogance was unmistakable. She'd introduced herself to other guests as Helena Davies, a successful entrepreneur taking a well-deserved break from her demanding business. For 3 days, I observed and listened. She was already running a smaller version of her Denver operation, targeting fellow hotel guests with promises of exclusive investment opportunities. She'd learned nothing from the collapse of her previous scheme. On the 4th day, I made my approach. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to her poolside table where she was having lunch with an elderly couple from Chicago. "Aren't you Heather Davidson from Denver?" Her face went pale for just a moment before she recovered. "I'm sorry. You must have me confused with someone else." "Oh no, I'm quite sure. You worked with my daughter Vanessa Stevens on that investment business. I'm Martha, her mother." The couple from Chicago looked between us with growing interest. Heather's smile became razor sharp. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. And I'm trying to enjoy lunch with my friends here." "Of course you are. Just like you were trying to enjoy spending Carol Peterson's $85,000, or Linda Martinez's house equity, or James Wallace's retirement fund." "Security," Heather called. But I continued speaking to the Chicago couple. "You should be very careful about any investment advice this woman gives you. She's currently under federal investigation for running a Ponzi scheme in Colorado." Hotel security arrived, but I smiled politely and handed them a business card I'd had made. "I was just leaving. It was lovely meeting you all." That night, Heather checked out of the resort, but I wasn't working alone anymore. The network of victims had evolved into something more coordinated. When Heather surfaced 3 days later in Panama, James's contact at the U.S. Embassy was ready. When she tried to check into a resort in Belize, Linda's hotel connections had already been alerted. For the first time in her criminal career, Heather found herself being hunted instead of hunting. The breakthrough came when she made her crucial mistake. She couldn't resist social media. Despite all the heat, Heather's need for validation was stronger than her survival instinct. She created a new Instagram account under Helena Davies and started posting again, subtle at first, then with increasing boldness. Pictures of tropical sunsets, expensive meals, designer outfits. Each post was carefully analyzed by our network of digital volunteers. But the post that sealed her fate was a video from what appeared to be a resort in the Bahamas. She was talking about new opportunities in international markets, clearly trying to rebuild her operation with a fresh identity. Linda's cousin ran the video through facial recognition software her former employer gave her access to. James used his tech background to trace architectural details in the background. Within 12 hours, we had confirmed her location. This time, we also contacted international media outlets. When Bahamian police knocked on Heather's hotel room door 2 days later, 3 news crews were waiting in the lobby. When she tried to leave through the service entrance, more reporters were positioned there with cameras rolling. The woman who'd built her fortune on image management found herself trapped by the very publicity she'd once craved. The video of her arrest went viral within hours. Heather Davidson, also known as Helena Davies, being led away in handcuffs while shouting about persecution and harassment. But the real victory wasn't her arrest. It was what we'd built in the process of hunting her down. The aftermath moved faster than anyone expected. Within a week of Heather's arrest in the Bahamas, the FBI had traced her financial activities across multiple states and countries. What they found was worse than any of us had imagined. Heather had been running variations of investment fraud for nearly 8 years, always moving before getting caught, always leaving devastated families in her wake. The Colorado scheme was just her most recent and largest operation. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified bank statements, fake testimonials, forged regulatory documents, and a sophisticated network of shell companies designed to hide stolen money. Most importantly for Vanessa, investigators found clear proof that she'd been manipulated rather than complicit. Heather's private communications, recovered from seized devices, revealed detailed plans to use Vanessa as a young, trustworthy face for recruitment while keeping her ignorant of the fraud. "Your daughter was a victim, not a co-conspirator," Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit told us during a meeting in early June. Ms. Davidson specifically targeted her because of her youth and genuine belief in the business model. The relief on Vanessa's face was profound, but the legal vindication didn't erase the emotional damage. "I feel so stupid, Mom," she said during one of our daily phone calls. "How did I not see what was happening?" "Because she was a professional, honey." Heather had been perfecting these techniques for years. She knew exactly how to make intelligent people feel special while stealing their money. "But I should have listened to you. You tried to warn me, and I called you bitter and jealous. Vanessa, you were protecting something you believed in. That's not stupidity, that's loyalty. The problem wasn't your loyalty, it was that Heather didn't deserve it." Richard's situation was more complicated. While he wasn't criminally liable, he'd lost the $50,000 he'd invested and faced civil lawsuits from some of Vanessa's recruits who felt he should have provided better oversight. More painfully for him, the scandal had destroyed his reputation in Denver's real estate community. Several deals fell through when clients decided they didn't want to work with someone associated with the fraud, even tangentially. "I don't understand how this happened," he said during one of our few conversations. "Heather seemed so successful, so legitimate. She seemed that way because that's what she wanted you to see. You saw what you wanted to believe. What's that supposed to mean?" "Richard, you left me for someone who made you feel important and successful. You never asked hard questions about how she made her money because you were too busy enjoying the lifestyle it provided." He was quiet for a long moment. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "I'm saying we all made choices based on what we wanted to believe rather than what we needed to know." As summer progressed, our victim network had evolved into something more permanent and organized. What started as a desperate search for one criminal had become a model for financial fraud recovery that was attracting attention from law enforcement agencies across the country. Carol Peterson used her accounting background to help other victims organize financial documentation for their cases. Linda Martinez started support groups for people dealing with the trauma of financial betrayal. James Wallace developed digital tools for tracking suspicious investment schemes. And I found myself with a new purpose I'd never expected: helping other families navigate the aftermath of financial crimes. "You should consider getting a private investigator license," suggested Jessica Martinez, the reporter who'd helped expose Heather's scheme. "You have a real talent for this kind of work." A year ago, my own daughter thought I was too unambitious to have opinions about business. Now, a professional journalist was suggesting I become a detective. "People underestimate you, Martha," Jessica continued. "That's actually a huge advantage in this line of work." She was right. Being dismissed as just a homemaker had given me a kind of invisibility that proved incredibly useful. Criminals didn't see me coming because they assumed I didn't matter. But as fall approached, I was about to learn that our victory against Heather was both more and less complete than we'd hoped. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early September. Agent Chen had news that left me staring at my coffee cup in disbelief. "Martha, Heather Davidson has agreed to a plea agreement." "What kind of plea?" She's providing information about other fraud networks in exchange for a reduced sentence. Instead of 25 to 30 years, she'll serve 10 to 15 with possibility of parole in 8. 10 to 15 years for destroying hundreds of lives, for stealing millions of dollars, for manipulating my daughter and countless others into becoming unwitting accomplices. What about restitution for the victims? That's the complicated part. Most of the money is gone. She spent it maintaining her lifestyle and funding new operations. Victims might recover 20 to 30 cents on the dollar, if we're lucky. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing the bitter taste of incomplete justice. When I called Vanessa to share the news, her reaction mirrored my own frustration. Only 10 years? Mom, that's not nearly enough. Maybe not, but Heather's information is helping the FBI shut down other schemes. Sometimes justice is about more than just punishment. What do you mean? Her case is being used to train federal agents now. The victim network we built is being replicated in other cities. The techniques we use to track her are helping law enforcement agencies nationwide. You really think that matters? I think it means she didn't win, even if her sentence feels light. 3 months later, Heather was sentenced in federal court. I sat in the gallery with Carol, Linda, James, and 24 other victims as she finally faced consequences for her actions. She looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair flat, and her confidence reduced to sullen defiance. When the judge asked if she had anything to say to her victims, she delivered a scripted apology that convinced no one. I take full responsibility for my actions and the harm they caused, she recited from notes her lawyer had obviously prepared. I hope someday I can make amends to those I've hurt. But when she thought no one was watching, I caught her rolling her eyes at the proceedings. Even facing a decade in prison, she felt no genuine remorse. After the sentencing, reporters interviewed several victims outside the courthouse. Carol spoke about losing her husband's life insurance money. Linda discussed nearly losing her house. James talked about the impact on his retirement security. When they turned to me, I had something different to say. Heather Davidson took a lot from all of us, but she also accidentally gave us something valuable. Proof that ordinary people can fight back against sophisticated criminals when they work together. She thought she could steal from us and disappear because we were just regular folks who didn't matter. She was wrong. That evening, Vanessa and I had dinner at the same chain restaurant where she'd once criticized the salmon and complained about my lack of ambition. "You know what's funny?" she said, cutting her fish. "This actually tastes pretty good. It always did. You just weren't paying attention." I wasn't paying attention to a lot of things. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry it took almost losing everything for me to realize what I already had." "You didn't lose everything, honey. You learned something important about yourself, that you're stronger than you knew. I learned that from watching you." As we drove home that night, I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, devastated by divorce, humiliated by my daughter's rejection, convinced that my life was essentially over at 42. That woman would never have believed she could track international criminals, build advocacy networks, or find a new career in her mid-40s. But then again, that woman had never been tested by someone like Heather Davidson. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you reveals capabilities you never knew you had. Not because the pain wasn't real, but because it forced you to become stronger than you ever thought possible. 1 year later, I was sitting in a congressional hearing room explaining to a subcommittee on financial crimes how victim networks could enhance traditional law enforcement efforts. The woman who'd once been dismissed as just a homemaker was now advising federal agencies on fraud prevention strategies. Vanessa sat in the gallery, beaming with pride as I presented our data on successful case resolutions and recovery rates. She'd started her own consulting business, helping small companies and individuals recognize and avoid financial scams. Her experience as a victim had become her area of expertise. "Mrs. Stevens," asked the subcommittee chair, "what would you tell other families dealing with financial fraud?" "I'd tell them that feeling helpless is normal, but being helpless isn't inevitable. Every skill you need to fight back already exists within your network of family and friends. You just have to be willing to use them and work together." After the hearing, Vanessa and I had lunch at a cafe near the Capitol building. "Mom, can I ask you something I've wondered about?" "Of course. That night you walked out of Christmas dinner. Did you already suspect Heather was running a scam? I stirred my coffee and considered the question. I knew something felt wrong about her business model, but honestly, I walked out because I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. What do you mean? Honey, I spent 19 years of marriage making myself smaller so your father could feel bigger. Then I spent 2 years after the divorce letting you treat me the same way. That Christmas dinner wasn't really about dish towels. It was about respect. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. I wish I could take back all those awful things I said. You don't need to take them back. You needed to learn some hard lessons about what success actually means and who you can really trust. Those lessons wouldn't have stuck if they'd come easy. But I hurt you so badly. Yes, you did. But pain isn't always damage, sweetheart. Sometimes it's just growth wearing a disguise. We sat in comfortable silence, watching tourists and government workers hurry past the cafe windows. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Heather hadn't been a criminal? Vanessa asked finally. If she'd really been the successful businesswoman she pretended to be, then your father would probably still be with her. You'd still be working for her, and I'd still be sitting in my apartment feeling sorry for myself. I reached across and squeezed her hand. So in a strange way, I'm grateful to her. Grateful. She forced me to stop accepting mediocrity, starting with how I let people treat me. She made me realize that being underestimated could be a strength instead of a weakness, and she gave me a purpose I never would have found otherwise. That evening, as my plane descended into Denver, I looked out at the city lights and thought about everything that had changed. Richard had quietly started dating someone new, a woman closer to his own age who seemed genuinely nice and had no interest in stealing anyone's family. Heather was serving her sentence in federal prison, her social media accounts permanently suspended and her appeals repeatedly denied. And I was returning home to a life I'd built for myself, not around someone else's dreams or expectations. The Fraud Recovery Network had grown into a national organization with volunteer chapters in 43 states. We'd helped recover over $12 million for victims and assisted law enforcement in prosecuting more than 75 scammers. But the victory I was most proud of wasn't measured in dollars or convictions. It was the relationship I'd rebuilt with my daughter, stronger now because it was based on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. The next morning, Vanessa called with news that made me laugh out loud. Mom, you're not going to believe this. Dad asked me to ask if you'd consider consulting on a real estate deal he's working on. He wants my business advice? Apparently, you've developed quite a reputation in certain circles. He said, and I quote, "Your mother has become someone you definitely don't want to bet against." I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, grateful for dish towels and desperate for scraps of affection from her own family. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who'd turned her greatest humiliation into her greatest strength. Tell your father I'm flattered, but I'm too busy building my own work to help him with his. It was true. At 45, I was just getting started. The scared, apologetic woman who'd walked out of that Christmas dinner was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming someone so successful that your enemy's opinions become irrelevant. 3 years ago, Heather Davidson thought she'd stolen my life. Instead, she'd accidentally forced me to build a better one. The joke, as it turned out, was on her. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.